Hello everybody, and welcome to my video about Boot Manager for the Android operating system running on an HTC Thunderbolt. Boot Manager is an application available for the Android OS, and it's produced by a company called In It to Win It Apps. This particular app is available on the market. I do not recall the price offhand, but it is something you definitely want to get off of the market instead of grabbing it from an aftermarket or black market, as the application will do a license check. And if you can't confirm your license on Amazon, off of the market, it'll go ahead and kick you out. Now, this particular application is designed for people who like to play around with some different ROMs on their phone. Another good reason why somebody might have this application is that they're new to a particular phone and they want to play around with a couple different ROMs before deciding on what one they want to use permanently. That's pretty much where I come in. This Thunderbolt is less than a month old to me, and just recently upgraded to it from a Droid Ares. It's a lot better than the Ares. It's a much snappier performance. It's also a little bit heftier. I hold the Ares now, and it feels like an alien artifact from ages past. It's just so tiny. So here is the lock screen that I've got currently for one of the ROMs that I'm using. It's got an HTC Sense UI going on for this particular ROM, and it's one of the ones by Thunderstick. Just grab the ring. Okay, here we are at my app drawer. Here's what my home screen looks like on my main ROM. You can see that we have my home screen over there with the flip clock. A couple apps over here, a couple apps over there. Contacts over there, calendar. Okay, now the application is right down here. It's Boot Manager. And we're going to go ahead and launch it. Right now what it's doing in the background is it is communicating with the network. It's running a license check on the market. It's also getting some files that it needs to run the application. If Boot Manager cannot connect to the network, you're going to have a problem. It's going to come up and say that it can't connect to the network, okay or cancel. No matter what button you hit, it kicks you out of the app. The only way around it, and I discovered this out of a lot of poking online, is to go ahead and hit the magnifying glass. Hit your little search button down there. If you don't do that, you'll be stuck in a loop where Boot Manager won't work. And I had that happen. I loaded up a ROM where the radio was not working properly, so it didn't connect to Wi-Fi, and I hadn't activated the phone on Verizon yet, so I was kind of out of luck. We'll get to that emergency situation a little later. Here's a screenshot of my primary ROM. It's in the first slot. As you see, it says phone ROM up there. That's basically the ROM that is on the phone at the time you install Boot Manager. Took a screenshot with an application, set it as a screenshot over here under Manage UI. Pick screenshot. And you see there's a couple options. Now you have slot 1, 2, 3, 4, and some settings. Has some nifty utilities with it, like cleaning the cache, emptying the trash, which empties the lost directory, fixed permission script, SD card speed booster, system mount, a couple reboot options. Now, here's an example of a blank slot in Boot Manager. This slot has nothing in it. All you need to do to get a ROM in a slot is to download the ROM and get it onto your SD card, preferably the root. You can do it by putting the SD card in a card reader on your PC or hooking up the Thunderbolt to the PC in disk drive mode. Once you have the zip on the SD card, you go to Install Zip. You pick Install Zip. Here's the root of your SD card. You scroll to where you have a zip file. There's Eternity. You pick it and you're given some options about what you want to do once the ROM loads, or in the process of loading up the ROM. Do you want to wipe the system, the data, or just the cache? You can pick which one you want to go with, and then you hit install. After you hit install, I highly recommend that you're on power, not battery at the time, as it can take upwards of 5 to 10 minutes, sometimes closer to 10, depending on how big the ROM is and if you pick EXT2 or 4. Now, once you have a ROM in a slot, the screenshots are not automatic. You have to take them and set the picture. You don't really need to take a screenshot of the ROM itself. You could take any old picture and put it there. And again, you get to that under Manage UI, where you can set the ROM name, kernel name, put a description, and set the screenshot. If you go to Manage Slot, this is where you can delete the slot entirely, resize the image, fix corrupted file system, can do a couple things here. Installing the zip, we see what that looks like now. Boot ROM tells the phone, okay, go ahead and restart, but don't boot into the main ROM, either boot into, one of these 4 over here. What we're going to do really quickly is go to one ROM, Eternity ROM. I'm going to pick this one for now because this one looks remarkably different from the ROM that I'm running. iCream over here in slot 2, and my main ROM, a Thunderbolt one, both use Sense 2. So they look similar. This uses a upgraded version of Sense, so this one's going to look a little bit different. So we'll go ahead and boot into that. While it's booting, there's the old Nook color still chugging along from my other video that I made. Still doing a pretty good job. Now, for the boot manager, if you run into that emergency situation in which you are stuck on a ROM that is not connecting to Wi-Fi or the network, don't panic like I did. We really didn't find an answer to this on In-It-To-Win-It's website. I had to kind of piece it together based on some of the posts that I was reading. What you need to do is to boot the phone into recovery mode. Once you're in recovery mode, you tell the phone to flash from a zip file. Once you tell it that, go into the root of your SD card and then go into the boot manager folder. Pick the ROM folder that you want, and then pick a file called update.zip. And as soon as I get control of my phone again, I'll walk you through it. This way you can see the directory structure should this emergency happen to you. You can see this particular ROM supports Beats audio, which I really need to experiment around with and take advantage of, see how different the sound is. And while it's doing that, we'll take a look at a widget over here for my Nook Color. That's a glass widget up here. That's what's doing the clock, the calendar, and the newsfeed. Behind it is Beautiful Widgets' live weather wallpaper. You hit the clouds and they disappear. There's the sun coming up. Basically displays the current weather as a live wallpaper. That's one of the reasons why I love this Thunderbolt, is my errors really was complete shit when it came to live wallpaper. It chugs badly. The Thunderbolt does it with complete ease. So here we can see the lock screen for Eternity ROM. It's similar to the Thunder Stick one that I was using. It has the ring, but it doesn't have the name of the ROM in it. It has some quick shortcuts. It has a clock up there. Pretty neat looking. This particular wallpaper is called Sorry Wallpaper. Now, one thing that this ROM can do for Boot Manager is that it can sync your messages across your ROMs. So if you get a text message in one ROM, you can have it get synced to the messaging application of all your other ROMs. It's really handy. And Boot Manager just got Super User. We'll see if it actually does that, because... Oh, I see. Messages crashing. So now this screen's a little bit different. The Sense widget up there for the clock is different. It's smaller. Takes up a little less space. This one has a couple of these widgets installed right out of the get-go. It's got a music one over there. It's got a watch one, friend stream. There's home screen, there's contacts, and 2 blank ones. So this Eternity ROM is probably one that I am going to play with. I might get rid of iCream just to keep the space okay. Now, in case of an emergency, if you ever need it, there's the boot manager folder on the root of your SD card. You go into it, and here's your ROM slots. There's your phone ROM, and then 1, 2, 3, and 4. If you run into an emergency where you're stuck booting into a ROM that you don't want to work with, and boot manager's not working, just tell it to flash from a zip file, pick the boot manager directory, and then pick whichever ROM you want to go into. Probably at that point you're so frustrated you're just going to pick anything that works, so you'll pick phone ROM, and notice update.zip over here. That's it. Tell the phone to flash from update.zip. It'll think, it'll go, okay, I'm done. Tell it to reboot, and there you go. You'll be back in the ROM that you picked, and you'll be up and working again. However, I definitely do recommend making sure you run a backup of the phone before you start playing around with Boot Manager. And for some particular reason, Messages is crashing over here. That's odd. I have run into one Thunderstick ROM that it would not install. I ran into another ROM where it had the broken Wi-Fi. I think that was a third Thunderstick one. Lightning ROM was able to get installed, and I even did boot up into it, took a screenshot, had the slot for it, had the screenshot associated to the slot, and then for some particular reason it stopped booting into it. You go to that slot, you hit boot ROM, and the phone would just look at you like you didn't do anything. So far, iCream, Eternity, and this one particular Thunderstick one have worked out pretty good. Now, briefly when I was up here, it flashed a message about the space on the SD card. That is something you need to watch with. If you're playing around with just 2 ROMs, like a phone one and an alt, 16 gigabyte cards will do you good. If you start playing around with more than 2, the phone and one other, once you go above that, you really should have like a 32 gigabyte one, because these ROMs do get kind of chunky in the space that they take up on your SD card. You know, it's essentially saving, it's like dual booting a Windows computer. So it can start eating up your space pretty badly. Here's some of the apps of infected ROM. A good thing that you can do if you're playing around with a lot of ROMs, you can get Titanium backup, back up your apps, and then load into the other ROM and restore them. This way, you know, if you have like 3 or 4 apps in one ROM that you really like, but you don't really like the ROM as a whole, you can just back up the apps and then transfer them over to your other ROM. And if we go into settings, go to About Phone and Software, you'll see some of the information about the ROM. There's Android 2.3.4, which all of them are running. HTC Sense, this one's 3.5 as compared to 2.1 for some of the others. And it doesn't really give information about the ROM like some of the others does, but there you go. It's a really, really handy utility. It's good if you like playing around with multiple ROMs, and some of the ways in which you could use it. You can have one ROM for when you're home, one for when you're at work. You could have one ROM as a main one and one as a test bed. You could have the same ROM in 2 different slots, but configured 2 different ways. So for example, if you really like Eternity ROM, you can have it as your phone ROM, and then in slot 1, load it up there, but maybe use an alternate launcher, like Go Launcher or ADDW. That's some of the ways in which you could actually use this. I'm now actually using it to play around with some different ROMs to find out which one I really like. So far, the Thunderstick one that I have in my main slot is definitely my favorite. And anytime you ever want to switch ROMs, you just go over to Boot Manager and just tell it to boot into the ROM of your choice. And that's about it. Hope you enjoyed this little video on Boot Manager by In It to Win It Apps. It's a HTC Thunderbolt that's been running it. And take care, everybody.